Hi, I'm Cassie, and in my kitchen today we're going to make lucky New Year's dumplings. Here in Japan, Lunar New Year is not celebrated as much as it is elsewhere, because the New Year's is celebrated on January 1st, so there aren't any particular culinary traditions. But if there were going to be some culinary traditions, it would probably be to eat dumplings. That's not just because it's super popular here in Japan, but also because sometimes in China it is considered to bring prosperity if you serve dumplings on New Year's Day, or midnight on New Year's Eve. And to further add to that prosperity, I've heard that in some parts of China people will put a coin into one of the dumplings, and whoever gets that particular dumpling is extra lucky. For several reasons, including not wanting to break my teeth on a coin, I'm not going to put in an actual coin today, but I'm going to be using a quail's egg. This way I'm hoping that when you bite into it, you'll still get that nice gold circle that you would get with a coin anyway. This is obviously a very experimental and non-traditional recipe, so I'm going to go one step further and make the dough from scratch and make it that nice bright red color that is typically associated with Chinese New Year. So let's start off by taking a look at what we'll need for our lucky red dumplings. So first, let's take a look at what we need to make that red gyoza wrapper. Here we're going to be using a mixture of bread flour and cake flour, which I think makes a really nice texture. Then to make it red, we're going to be using some chili powder. I accidentally got this Korean chili powder instead of the Chinese one, but the look and taste is very similar, so that's up to you. However, when you do add this kind of red chili powder, I did find that the gyoza wrapper ended up a little bit more orange than red, so I'm also going to be adding a little bit of red food coloring in powder form. Just a very tiny bit to make sure that it's red instead of orange. And to flavor our gyoza wrapper, we're going to add a little bit of salt. And of course we'll need some water to bring it all together and some potato starch to make sure that each sheet doesn't stick together. Then for our filling ingredients, we actually have quite a lot of stuff here, but the main event is the meat and the vegetables. Today I'm using pork mince, and I was drawn in by this picture of dumplings on the front, but this is actually lean mince. You don't need to use lean meat. If you want a slightly more flavorful, slightly more fatty version, then you can get a more fatty mince, that's fine. And then our vegetables are the cabbage and Chinese chives, which are a pretty standard filling ingredient for dumplings or pot stickers. Then we've got our garlic and ginger, which I think are an essential part of dumplings. Then we have all of our seasonings. We're going to be adding a little bit of salt, but we'll also be getting at some of the saltiness from the soy sauce, and also I often put this into a dip at the end, which is soy sauce, so you really don't need to be adding too much of the actual salt. Then I'm going to be using this Japanese cooking sake, but that's just because I have it in my kitchen already. If you are buying this specifically for these dumplings, then I would recommend using the Chinese Shaoxing wine instead. Then we're going to be adding a little bit of sesame oil, which is also a pretty standard ingredient in dumplings. It gives it a nice little bit of flavor and it adds a bit of juiciness to it. Then we're also going to be adding some white pepper. This is not necessarily a standard ingredient in dumplings, but I think that it really gives that earthy umami flavor to the dumplings. And then finally, here are the quail's eggs. Obviously, I'm using quail's eggs instead of normal eggs because these are going to fit into the dumplings much more easily. I'm going to be using a few quail's eggs, but you can use as many or as few as you want. You can just have one for that one lucky person if you want to. Then we'll also need a little bit of water here too, because we're going to put some water into the filling to loosen it up slightly, and we're going to use some water to put around each of the dumpling wrappers just so that we can pinch them together. Of course, I've put links to most of these ingredients down in the description below, so if you are going to make these and you do need to buy the ingredients, it would be lovely if you could also support me in the process. So after looking at that long list of ingredients, let's get on to the preparation. So before we do anything else, then we're just going to boil our quail's eggs. Because they're so small, it only takes 2 minutes to get a runny yolk with quail's eggs, and we want it to be as runny as possible because they are going to be double cooked when we put them into our dumplings. So the way that I always boil my eggs is that I get my water already to a boiling point, and then I lower in the eggs very slowly in a ladle. I sort of swivel them around in my ladle to make sure they're getting a lot of the hot water, just so that we don't shock them and crack them when they do go into the boiling water. Then once they've been boiling for 2 minutes, take them straight off the heat and put them straight into a bath of ice water. This will stop them cooking and also make it easier to peel them later. And man, these are so fiddly to peel, they're so small. So now let's get on to making our red dumpling dough. Today we're using a mix of bread flour and cake flour. And if you're interested in the difference between using different flours for the dough, or you want a more in-depth look into making dough from scratch, then I have a video on screen now about gyoza dough from scratch, but today we're just going to go over it fairly quickly. So simply combine all of your dough ingredients together. Depending on the type of flour that you're using, you may find that you need more or less water. So you might want to add your water a bit at a time rather than all at once. Then bring your dough together with a rubber spatula first until it forms a shaggy dough. Then start using your hands. So once you've brought it together with your hands and there's no flour left in the bowl, you can start kneading. And we're going to knead this for about 10 minutes until it's nice and smooth. So I hope your arms are ready for a little bit of a workout. Then once you've been kneading for 10 minutes and it looks nice and smooth like this, cover up your dough. I usually use beeswax wrap for this, but you can of course use cling film, and leave it to rest at room temperature for 30 minutes. Don't put it in the fridge because it will probably dry out. Then whilst we're waiting for our dough to rest, we're going to make the filling. Because making dumplings is quite a long process, then I do tend to use a food processor to cut up all of my ingredients. But if you want more control over the size of all of your ingredients, then you can of course cut by hand. So I peel what needs peeling, which is the garlic and the ginger. And then I just chop them into smaller manageable chunks so that they will go into my food processor and not cause too many problems. Sometimes the Chinese chives do get a little bit stuck, they can get a little bit rubbery, so if you want to cut this part by hand just to make sure that they really are cut, then you can do that too. You'll probably notice that I'm not using a lot of each of these ingredients, and I've only got 1/8 of a cabbage. So if you have a lot of these ingredients and you need to use them all up, then you can just put them all into the food processor and then blend it and just basically make the filling, but then cook it and have it on rice or make it with fried rice. It's just as tasty and you don't need to make a million dumplings. Once I've blended everything, I put it into a bowl. And then I add my pork mince. Then once we've put the pork mince in here, we're going to add all of our flavorings and a little bit of water. A big part about cooking is that you need to taste while you go, but of course with this filling, then it's got raw meat in it, so you can't just eat a little bit and check if it's well seasoned. So something that I do to check the flavor is to just take a small bit of this filling and put it in a pan and kind of make a very small patty, and then just flip it and cook it on each side for a few minutes, and then just taste it. That's the perfect way to just see how well seasoned it is. And now that the filling is done, our dough should be nice and well rested. So we're going to take that out of its wrapper and roll it into a log. This is the easiest way to get evenly sized wrappers. Then we're going to cut this into 24 pieces. And whenever you're not working on some of the dough, you should cover it to make sure that it doesn't dry out. Then we're going to roll each of these into a nice circle. The great part about using some bread flour in this is that it's a very stretchy dough, so it snaps back into position. So that means that you can just roll it out as far as you can, and then it will be the perfect size. Whereas if you use cake flour, then it's a lot more delicate, so it kind of keeps going, and it might break whilst you're rolling it or break when it's being cooked. And instead of flour, I'm using just a little bit of potato starch here to stop it from sticking to the rolling pin or my work surface. And each time that you finish rolling one, then make sure that you have a thin layer of potato starch between each wrapper, because otherwise they'll get all stuck together and you won't be able to use them. So now we've got 24 rolled out dumpling wrappers, so now we need to add the filling. So because I like to do it in batches, then I put a spoonful of filling onto each wrapper. Then I start working on pleating them. So I get a little bit of water and I run that around the edge of the wrapper. Then to close them, we're going to do a common pleating method. So you fold it in half and pinch together the top, but don't seal the rest of it, just the top middle part. Then pleat going down one side, and then pleat going down the other side. And there you go, a nice neat little dumpling. So just do this for all 24 of your dumplings, remembering to add a quail's egg here and there. Of course, this is a lot easier if you have someone else to help you too. Now we can finally move on to the cooking part. We're almost there. I can almost taste them. Well, actually I can kind of taste them because I ate that one that I kind of cooked, but... Then we're going to fry them first and then cover them and steam them. So I start off by putting about a tablespoon or just over a tablespoon of oil into my pan. Then I layer on all of my dumplings, making sure that they're not touching, because sometimes they can cook and stick together. Then after about 2 to 3 minutes on a medium heat, you should get a nice crispy base. And because these have a lot of red in them, then they are a little darker than they usually would be with a normal wrapper. Then once they're nice and crispy, we're going to take them off the heat because we're about to add some water and we don't want it to splatter everywhere. So take the pan off the heat for about a minute, or alternatively you can put it onto a damp tea towel to cool it down. Then put it back onto the heat and add the water and cover it. Then we're going to cook those for about 3 minutes or until all of the water has disappeared. If after 3 minutes the water is still there, then turn up the heat a little bit and put your lid back on and just steam it until all of the water has gone. Then at the end, to make them extra crispy, I sometimes add a little bit of sesame oil just to make the bases nice and crunchy. And there you go, our beautiful red dumplings for the Lunar New Year. I often eat these in quite a Japanese way with a little bit of soy sauce and rice vinegar as a dip, but you can use whatever dip you'd like. These really aren't that spicy, there's just a kind of nice red colouring to them, so if you do want to make them spicier, then you can add another tablespoon or 2 of spice to the dough. I really love the addition of the white pepper to the filling. It really adds that nice deeper umami flavour to it. And here's a nice shot of that quail's egg. I'm going to be eating half of these, so I guess I'm going to be pretty lucky with all of my quail's eggs coins. This was a pretty non-traditional recipe, but it was a lot of fun to make for the Lunar New Year. And if you had fun watching it or you're thinking of making it yourself, then please subscribe and experiment along with me. But that's it for today, so I'll see you next Sunday.